I can't even begin to tell you what I think of this book. From a certain point of view, is a 40th anniversary special of the original Star Wars, told in a whole bunch of short stories that a lot of them are terrible. Where do I begin? I thought about reviewing every single story, but there's just way too many of them. This would be like a 45-minute review, and I really don't want to talk about this book for that long. It starts from the beginning of Star Wars and the end of Star Wars, and also talking about writing the title crawl for Star Wars. So, I'll give you a couple stories I liked and a couple I hated, I guess. Jesus Christ. Rights by John Jackson Miller is probably one of the best stories in here, because it takes a character he had in his expanded universe novel, Kenobi, and brings her back into this. I won't say who it is, but be prepared when I talk about Kenobi for that. It's a nice Easter egg. I guess she's canon as well as being in Legends, so that's cool. John Jackson Miller fit in this book, which a lot of these writers didn't. The next one, Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray, is probably the best story in this book. It is Qui-Gon talking to Obi-Wan when Qui-Gon knows what's going to happen to Obi-Wan, but Obi-Wan doesn't realize what's going to happen to him yet. It's a really, really good story. It's probably one of the best things I've ever read from Claudia Gray, which is saying something because she consistently writes good material. So that was a good one. The Beru story by Meg Cabot is terrible. A whole lot of these are terrible right in a row, and I can tell you right when the quality dropped for this book. It was right around the time they decided to redo Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina for a good chunk of this book. That might be partially why I didn't like it, because it's been there, done that. But there's also so much garbage. Chuck Wendig has a book in there that's actually not terrible, but The Barkeeper. There's a few other decent ones in here. Sparks by Paul S. Kemp is not is okay. The Trigger is okay by Kieran Gillen. Dusty Roster by Jason Fry is not bad. But man, there's some really terrible stuff in here, and I'm about to give you my two ones that were on my shit list for this book. Palpatine by Ian Delsher is absolutely terrible. It's a poem from Palpatine's perspective on things. It's absolute garbage. Just terrible. The worst story in this book, though, has to go to Of MSE 6 and Men by Glenn Weldon. Genuinely the worst thing I've ever read, period. I've read textbooks that are a lot better than this. I've read a lot of things that are better than this. Chuck Wendig's Aftermath books are better than this. Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void's better than this. Crystal Star's better than this. There's so many things that I was required to read in English in high school that are significantly better than this. This is genuinely one of the worst things I have ever read. I didn't need a story from the perspective of a mouse droid. Are you kidding me? Terrible, terrible. Verge of Greatness by Pablo Hidalgo's okay. There's a few others. There's like a Beth Revis has a decent one in there. There's an incident report from the perspective of one of the Moth Council that's pretty funny. But the thing is, the big drawback of this book is how repetitive a lot of the writing styles are in it. And it's not fun. So much first person. I don't really want to read first person. I don't. It's not something I choose to read on a regular basis. I find it to be a really tedious way to read a book. Chuck Wendig's... It's weird when Chuck Wendig, I put him at the scale of average in this book, which is just how bad some of this garbage in here is. There's just a whole bunch of trash in this book. And there's some good stuff, like I pointed out already. There's probably a few others. I know there's a Lando story by Charles Soule, who wrote the Lando miniseries for Marvel. It felt right, being as though I just finished the Lando miniseries, which I'll be reviewing very soon. Decent. There's a Yoda story in here that's pretty decent, too. There's Obi-Wan dying, which could have been better, but there's repetitive things are said over and over again in it, and it becomes really annoying. E.K. Johnston and Ashley Eccleston write a story that comes to mind that's really just boring more than anything else. I was a little disappointed with that. And that's Will Wheaton wrote something that was boring too. That's like the theme of this is could have been good, but really wasn't. Here's my biggest problem with this book, though. There should have been more Star Wars writers in it. And here's what I mean. 40 years of Star Wars. 40 years of content. This is supposed to be... Well, if the EU still existed and this came out, we would have had a different roster. Certain people would not have been allowed to write. And I'm not even just saying Chuck Wendig. Chuck Wendig, out of a lot of the people that wrote for this book, Chuck Wendig has more right to it than anyone else because he's written Star Wars. And that's what I thought this book was about. So, where's Timothy Zahn? Where's Kevin J. Anderson? Where's Kathy Tyers? L. Neil Smith, who wrote the Lando Calrissian trilogy. Why isn't he in this? William C. Ditz, Hayden Blackman. I think Hayden Blackman might actually have a story in there, but I'm not sure. John Ostrander. In a nice world, Karen Travis would be in this, but Karen Travis is banned from Del Rey, so I understand that. But you get the idea here. For a book that's 40 years of celebrating 40 years of Star Wars, they sure as hell didn't really have a whole lot of writers that wrote for Star Wars. I mean, there was a handful of them that had written before. Most of them write the new content, which is fine. Beth Revis, Claudia Gray, John Jackson Miller, Paul S. Kemp, they all deserve to be in here. I have no problem with them being writing this stuff. Charles Soule, Kieran Gillen. I don't even remember Jason Aaron wrote something, but if he did, he has a right to it too. Greg Rucka is another one. But Will Wheaton doesn't really need to be in this book. I'm sorry, I like Will Wheaton. Stand By Me is one of my favorite movies. But I don't want Will Wheaton writing a boring Star Wars story when I could have Timothy Zahn in there instead, writing something significantly better. And I will defend Chuck Wendig on this for once. Chuck Wendig, I may hate his books, a very large percentage of us do, but he has more of a right to writing this stuff than Will Wheaton. And I'm bagging on Will Wheaton a whole lot. There's a whole bunch of others who I had never even heard of. Delilah S. Dawson writes one in here too that's terrible. Overall, it could have been better if we had better writers. Or at least writers that knew how to write Star Wars. Like, I'm just boggled by the amount of people. Like, I had no clue who they were. And I like to think that I've read a whole lot of the new canon. I think I've read like the majority of it. I think I know who's who when it comes to that. But there were just a ton of people. Gary Whitta wrote a screenplay. That's cool. What's not cool is whatever his first name is, Welton, and his mouse droid story, which is one of the worst things I've ever read. But I'm getting rambly here. Overall, this gets 1.5 out of 5 stars. I wouldn't recommend this. I would recommend like a handful of stories, and that's the sad thing, is these really good stories are wrapped up with a bunch of majority terrible stories. And before I get done here, this book is weirdly sized. I've never seen something quite like it. It's a little taller than the book club size, and it's wider this way. Like, what on earth? But I digress. Have a nice day, everyone.